Thank you for coming. First, tell us a little bit about yourself, your name, your major, and where you call home.
My name is Lizzie. I'm a senior math major and I call Salem, Oregon home.
So, we'd like to start with a little bit of background on your interactions with religion. This can be anything from whether you yourself identify as religious, family's religious background, or anything else you think we should know.
So I would describe myself as a spiritual but not religious person. And I would call my background what I've called like traditionally Catholic. So my parents and my grandparents grew up Catholic. Like my grandparents are very Catholic, and so my parents also grew up very Catholic. And to some extent, they still hold Catholic beliefs. And we used to go to church all the time when I was younger. But then as I got older, my parents, I would still describe them as Catholic, but it's kind of evolved into kind of more into that spiritual side. Like they still hold some very Catholic beliefs, but they're not like hardcore Catholic, I guess. So that's what I mean by like traditionally Catholic. That this is how we grew up, and this is like to some extent like this is what we believe, but we're not like we don't go to church every week and then like strictly adhere to Catholic beliefs and stuff.
So, how do you think religion has impacted your sense of belonging within communities or not belonging?
I don't know. I haven't really thought much about it before. When we would go to church, it like going to church did make me feel like I was part of a community because, especially when I was like a lot younger, we would go to a Lutheran church in Woodburn, and so there were always events, and like my parents knew people, and I know a lot of my friends also went to a lot of the same churches, and like they still do, or their families still do. So I guess church was just like one of those things that like everybody did that I grew up with, so like it was like a common experience, and that helped me with my sense of belonging here in Salem and growing up in school. And I also found out like a lot of my classmates and a lot of my peers also had that same kind of like separation as they got older too. It's like, oh, I don't go to church with my parents anymore, or like I'm not Catholic anymore. I also saw those same kind of changes that I saw in myself. So that common experience also helped me like realize that like a lot of my classmates also grew up like me.
Okay, so now we want to ask a little bit about your political background. Do you identify with any particular side? Why or why not?
Well, now I don't identify as Democrat, and I've never identified as Republican. I think I don't like political parties because I don't think there's a party that's ever going to represent like at least half of the population well enough ever. So I think like this bipartisanship that we have in the US is not like, even though some might deem one better than the other, like better doesn't usually mean better for everyone. But I know that I have privilege in being a U.S. citizen, and I am able to vote. So I'm listed as like a working families member of the Oregon Working Families Party, because I still believe that like I should use that privilege of being able to vote.
So first, thank you for coming. To begin, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your name, your major, and where you call home?
Yeah, so my name, Noel Marcos Gutierrez. Got my name from my parents, both their last names. I'm a biochem major with a social minor, and then I also call Salem home, so local.
Yes. So we'd like to start with a little bit of background on your interactions with religion, whether you yourself identify as religious, your family's religious background, or anything else you think we should know.
Yeah. I feel like I don't really personally identify with any particular religion. I think the name for it, the term is agnostic. So it's like more spiritually oriented, but not a specific religion.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that comes from my family, because my family is really they're not heavily Catholic, but they have Catholic beliefs. Especially since we are Mexican, we believe in like Virgin Mary, and we really like hold Virgin Mary really dear. Um, so growing up in that community, in that atmosphere, I think has kind of created that sense of like, oh, maybe there's something more and there's something out there. But also my family wasn't super religious. We didn't really go to church that often. It wasn't really forced upon us. Our parents didn't like require us to pray or anything. It was more like, this is what we do. If you want to do it, you can do it. So I think that gave me a lot of liberties to say like, I want to step back from that a little bit. And so I felt comfortable doing that with my family.
Cool. Thank you. So for our next question, how do you think religion has impacted your sense of belonging within particular communities or not belonging?
Yeah, I think when I was young, it kind of gave me a sense of not belonging. Because throughout school or in communities, I think, especially in like Latinx communities, there's a big sense of being Catholic and being part of those like religious events and religious holidays. And then my family wasn't really into that, and so I was like, oh, my friends went to church on Sunday, like I didn't, so I didn't get to see them, right? And then there was this sense of we are like, what church are you from? What church are you from? And I'm like, well, I don't go to church, and then people look at you like, oh, you're weird. So I was like, wait, no, I'm not, right? And so that was a lot when I was a younger kid. I felt like, oh, we don't belong that. But I also didn't feel comfortable. If we ever did go to church, I didn't feel comfortable being there or practicing. So in a way, I was so thankful that my parents didn't like force that on me. But yeah.
So now we want to ask a little bit about your political background. Do you affiliate with one side or another? Why or why not?
Yeah, I think I won't say like a particular party. Of course, like I lean more Democratic than like Republicans, because but ideologically I'm a little bit more liberal, and I feel like Democratic Party should be a little bit more liberal and like encompass more POC issues, because America has had a really long history of killing a lot of POC people and POC communities. So that's where I kind of assign myself. But I don't think like my religious ideology has influenced my political view. It's more like my political view has kind of influenced my religious views. So not growing up super religious, it wasn't a strong ideology that I had. But I kind of had more of a sense of like just be a good person, right? Like accept people who are different, like just listen to others, and kind of growing up like that, that liberal ideology came into my head, and I identify that with that now. So now I use that to kind of say like, oh, in religion I would be a little bit more of a liberal thought of religion, so not super like Catholic conservative, but more liberal conservative, in whatever like aspect of religion that may be. So yeah, it's been kind of weird.
Cool. So how do you think your religious background affected your opinion on particular political topics or issues?
Religious background affected political topics? Is that question? Yeah. Like when I was younger, it did affect a lot more, because I think I was more, what's the word, susceptible?
Yeah.
To stuff like that. So I think, especially with like Catholicism, it's more conservative, like, you know, what is it called? Not pro-life, right? Like pro-life is like a really big thing. And then growing up with my parents, they were like, oh, like abortion's like the worst thing you can do and stuff like that. And so like that's what I was kind of growing up into. But then as I kind of understood more and got out of the household and went to like schools and like just kind of became my own individual, I started questioning it a little bit more. And so now like I said, more of my ideology influences my religion rather than my religion influencing my ideology.
Cool. So on that note, how do you think your religious or political views changed since coming to Willamette?
Yeah, I think I was like, I was coming more in terms of like what I believed in and who I was throughout high school. And I had like a big idea of like the things that I thought and I believed in, but coming to Willamette gave me like language to name it, gave me language to talk about it more, rather than say like, oh, I'm not that, or I'm more this, and like being super ambiguous about it. And now here, I think that's what, yeah, it gave me a little bit more language. And I think an example of that's kind of like in high school, you think we were all super progressive in school. We were all young, like POC. My high school is predominantly POC. And then coming here, it's like, oh, well, there's two kinds of liberals, right? You can be like the working class POC liberal, or you can be like the white liberal that's like says they're for you, and like, yeah, they can do the things that like will support you, but at the same time, they can be oblivious to other challenges that POC have to face on a daily. And so it's things like that, just having more language to talk about it and more examples, I think is what Willamette has given me, but it hasn't really like transformed my way of thinking or like opened my mind to something like marvelous, because it's kind of like, oh, the world is shitty. That's like, yeah.
Thank you. So then for our last question, what has encouraged you to continue or to not continue within your religious community?
What has not encouraged me, my family, I think I haven't continued my family's religion, because I have seen like the negative aspects of what it can do, and like I think Catholicism particularly is really like entrenched with like patriarchy, and then the sense of super conservatism, and so like those are things that I don't appreciate, and so I don't want to like continue that. But I have taken like the positive things, so and the never having the sense of hope and saying like, oh, even though things may be shitty, like God will provide a plan for you and will like help you out, or like Virgin Mary like loves her kids, and so like will love you despite your flaws. Kind of like those positive things I think I've taken, and kind of decided to leave the negative things behind, and then kind of trying to make my own thing and saying like, well, these are thoughts that I can apply universally and not just tie it just to Catholicism, because it's not something that's just born or unique to like the Catholic religion. So I'm trying to figure out what else is out there and see what else I can find. But I don't consider myself like religious, especially like my family is. So.
So thank you for coming. First, tell us a little bit about yourself, your name, your major, and where you call home.
Okay. My name is Andrea Rivas. My major is sociology, and I'm minoring in American Ethnic Studies. I'm currently a junior at Willamette, and I call home two places, but one in Salvador because I was born there, and two, California, because that's where my family currently is.
So we want to start with a little bit of background on your religious interactions. So this can be anything from whether or not you identify as religious, your family's religious background, or anything you think we should know.
Okay. When I was younger, my family used to go to Catholic church a lot, so that's what I grew up with. Or not a lot, but they would go to church. And so I grew up doing that. And my grandma and aunts in my family, they also go to church. So I grew up with that. But recently, in the past few years, especially while being at school, I haven't really been involved with or engaged in any particularly religious practices. But I do think I still believe in certain things or have some type of spirituality, but I'm not really sure what it is, or I don't practice it necessarily in the ways that are considered the way to do it, I guess.
Okay. So how do you think religion has impacted your sense of belonging within particular communities or not belonging within others?
I think, especially back home, going to church and being surrounded by Latinx communities or people of color who went to church, I felt really connected in that sense.
And then, yeah, like I said, in the past years, I haven't really been connected to a religion specifically as much, so I'm not sure recently, but before I felt connected in that way.
So now, can you tell us a little bit about your political background? Do you lean any sort of way, or why not?
Yeah, for political background, I think if I had to pick a party, obviously I'd do the Democratic Party, if that's what we're talking about. But I think the main things that I really care about when making political choices or when focusing on issues in a certain way and like trying to focus on like a political candidate or things like that, I think focusing on like social justice issues and human rights is really important, and prioritizing the well-being of individuals regardless of whether they come from or regardless of their criminal background and things like that. So I think whichever party aligns, which historically or at least now tends to be Democratic Party, even though at times even they're not the best at representing the needs of communities of color or marginalized people.
So how do you think your religious background has affected your opinion on particular political issues or topics or candidates?
I don't think it's affected it too much, just because I don't, like I said, I don't really have a practice religion as much, or I don't necessarily like follow the beliefs necessarily. Like there's some things that I believe in, but I don't think it affects the way I see or interact with like political issues. Mainly, yeah, because I don't practice religion as much anymore. Yeah.
So how do your religious or political views, how do you think those have changed since coming to Willamette?
The religious views, or
religious or political?
Religious or political. I think for religious views, I thought that religion or religious views had to be like really concrete, and that you had to follow certain ways of like engaging with or practicing a religion. But now, especially being here and like away from home and not having to necessarily like do those certain things like go to church or things like that, I've learned about things that work for me that don't necessarily embody necessarily the religion as a whole. But I think also learning about how like spirituality or believing in certain things can provide some type of comfort for you, or can give you the things you need without necessarily having to practice every little aspect of our religion. And I think that's really important, because there's things that I don't particularly agree with or want to follow, and I think it's important to have that place and like space to do what helps you in like being a better person. And yeah.
Do you think your political views have changed at all?
My political views, I wouldn't say that they've changed like drastically. I just think that I've come across a lot more knowledge and experiences that I think have kind of reinforced those views and ideas, and have enabled me to further understand and like be able to voice like why I believe those things or why I have those political views. Yeah.
So what has encouraged you to continue or not continue within your religious community? So I know we talked about not being at home, but is there anything else?
No, I think not being at home would be the main thing, because even sometimes when I go home, my family will go to church and I like will go with them sometimes. But I think that's the main thing.
Thanks for coming in. First, tell us a little bit about yourself, your name, your major, and where you call home.
So I'm Bethel. My major is sociology and communications, and I'm from Portland.
Cool. So we'd like to start a little bit with looking into your religious interactions. So this can be anything from whether or not you yourself identify as religious, your family's religious background, or anything you think we should know.
So I did grow up like in a really religious household, and I still am like religious, but I have like changed in the way I am religious. So yeah.
Cool. So, what do you think, or how do you think religion has impacted your sense of community?
Honestly, I think like before coming to college, so like I also went to like religious school all my life, so it was kind of like very like everybody was the same as me, everybody believed the same things as me, and then it was like when I transferred my senior year, that's like was the first time when I was around like other people that didn't have like the same religious background as me, and I don't think it really changed. Like I obviously didn't have that community because I was religious at my religious school because it was just kind of the norm. So like if you like nobody still really talked about it, we were just all at a religious school, and then like even coming to college and like when I transferred out of that school, it's just something that never really comes up, and it's like a very personal thing, and I don't really like find community in it, especially because of like how much my views are kind of like different than like most people who are a part of the same denomination as me. So it's just kind of like a fact about me, but it's like I don't find community in it that much.
So, so now tell us a little bit about your political background. Do you identify one way or another, and why or why not?
So I would think that I identify more like just like I'm more left leaning, and like the denomination I'm a part of is very right leaning, so it's like very interesting. I was like pretty much like very sheltered up until like high school, where I then did my own research, and then I realized like a lot of things are really messed up, that I was being taught and that I believed in. So like kind of after that, I just like became just more left leaning, and I like will talk like there are some like more right like beliefs where like I have to like deconstruct and relearn to like understand that they're not right, and then like even those things, I like talk to my family about, because like I don't want them to like be kind of shielded by the religious part of it and not really see like the outcomes of what some right leaning like beliefs are meant to like actually be about.
Okay. So, how do you think your religious background affected your opinion on particular like political issues or political topics?
So this is interesting because I personally I just see it as like the way that I'm religious is like everything. If like as much as hold on, how do I word this? So like I just want the best for people, and like most importantly like marginalized communities, or like so people can have like more access to things and like resources and everything, and like with some religious like groups, their views on some stuff is like not very like it doesn't center marginalized people, so I usually really kind of like don't cross with those two. Like so like my way of like how I see religion sometimes is like very different of like the majority, so it doesn't really affect how I see like my political views are still very like what a lot of people wouldn't agree with that are like of my denomination, because like they are more right leaning. So I would say basically yeah, they don't really affect my political views.
So, do you think your religious background has an effect on things like your voting patterns, or who you choose to endorse in terms of political candidates?
So like yeah, my like renewed like religion, like definition of religion, but for me like how I do it, it definitely does affect that, because like it all comes back to making life easier for people, or like less scary. So if that's what it is, and that because that's how I want to partake in religion, then like yeah, it does have an impact.
So, how have your religious and political views changed since coming to Willamette?
I definitely don't believe in a lot of things I used to believe in, through like education and like not being in a bubble of like people who like all taught the same thing. So that has definitely changed, and like I do my best in like trying to kind of educate others that I like grew up with, because like we were all part of like this like just circle of like religion. And so like yeah, that has changed a lot, and I like always have conversations with like my mom and like my brother about how sometimes what we learn at church isn't like really like it's kind of messed up, and like I try to bring in like facts and stuff like that and just like other perspectives. So that's like definitely changed, and like I do get criticized about it a lot. Like when I go home for breaks and stuff, like people are always asking like, oh, so I see you posting a lot of this stuff on Facebook. So it can be like challenging there, but it's honestly, I don't really care that much about what they say. And then in terms of my political beliefs, I wasn't really very like aware of things until like my junior year of high school. And that was also like about when I started like having different beliefs in terms of like religion. So I feel like up until now, like I think from junior year of high school till now, they're very similar, because that's when I really started getting involved and like informed.
So for our last question, what has encouraged you to continue or not continue within your religious community?
I think for me, the thing that has, because sometimes I think about it and I'm like, I don't even know if it's like worth it. And like, does me staying like a part of a religious community, does that mean like I'm complicit? So that's like a question that I ask myself a lot. So that's like where like me trying to educate other people kind of comes in, because like it's just like something I've known my whole life. Like literally I've been going to the same church since I was like a day old. Well, maybe not, I wasn't born the day before like I went to church, but like since I was very little, so it's like very hard to remove myself from that. Also, it's just like a very big part of like my like mom's like background, and so even like quote unquote leaving the church is like, if I were to do that, like it would just be really bad for, like I don't even want to like think about what that would like do to my mom, and like just how people would like basically talk like poorly about her and how she raised me. So that's like a really big thing, and brings the question up of like, am I complicit? So I just try to do my best to like inform like those in my circles that have the same upbringing, or like my mom, and like critiquing religion more, just so it's not like we just don't accept what we hear, and like we look at it again and see like, hey, is this actually right?
So first, tell us a little bit about yourself, your name, your major, and where you call home.
So my name is Francesca Florendez. I'm currently a 4th year at Willamette, and I'm a Latin American Studies major, and American Ethnic Studies minor, and Spanish minor. And I call Southern California home. That's where I grew up for 18 years. And a little bit about myself, I identify as Peruvian American. My dad was born in Peru and came to the United States, and my mom is American, she's white. And so I grew up in a bicultural, bilingual household, and that's how I grew up for 18 years. And yeah.
So we'd like to start with a little bit of background on your interactions with religion. This can include anything from whether your family is religious, you yourself identify as religious, or anything else you think we should know about your interactions with religion.
So growing up in my family, which was my mom and my dad and then my 2 older sisters, we never really were religious. We didn't really go to church on Sunday. We didn't do really anything affiliated with the church until I was an 8th grader in middle school. And my Peruvian family, so my dad's side of the family, they're all very religious. And so whenever we'd go visit them in Peru, I'd be religious. There'd be crosses everywhere. And that's like, I was always aware of it, and I was always like, oh, like they're religious, but like I never grew up in a household that was religious. It was never like forced upon us. It was never like we have to go to church. That was not part of our daily routines. But I knew it was like important to my dad because he grew up in Peru and like he's obviously connected to his family, but it was never like integrated in our like daily routines or anything like that. But whenever we'd go to Peru and visit my family, it would be like, why isn't Franny me? Like, why isn't she baptized? Because my 2 older sisters were baptized when they were born, and I wasn't. And that has to do with different parenting styles between my mom and my dad, but also that
when they got to me, because I came 12 years later from my middle sister, that like religion just didn't play a factor into anything really. And so I wasn't baptized, and that was always kind of like a running joke with my Peruvian side of the family of like, why isn't Franny baptized? Like everyone else is baptized. And so when I was an 8th grader in middle school in Peru, I got baptized, and I was baptized in Peru.
That's really cool. So what was your experience getting baptized in Peru?
Yeah, so I had a lot of friends that were baptized like in like growing up. Like I just knew their experience of like going to the like communion classes and all of those like very like rigorous classes that were always like weekly or whatnot. And I remember like hearing my friends talk about that. And then when I was preparing to get baptized, I did like 1 or 2 meetings with the priest who was going to be baptizing me, and it was all in Spanish. And I remember thinking like, oh, like I'm not doing any of the classes. I'm really confused as to what's happening. But what had happened was that like my dad and like my godparents knew the priest and like wanted me to get baptized so bad that I had somehow like was able to forego doing classes and just do like these 2 2-hour meetings with the priest of like why religion is important, why is it important to be Catholic, all the ins and outs of it, which was a lot to handle in my brain as an 8th grader, because it was like the first time I was like ever introduced to like sincere like religion to like Catholic religion, and so it was a lot for me to process, but I did it. And then I got baptized in Peru in a church, and I was baptized as Catholic, and it was really interesting as like I wasn't an adult, but as a teenager, to get baptized with all of this like background information that my friends like grew up like young and like going to classes and getting baptized, and then here I was like doing these like very small, in my eyes, like small classes or meetings, really I shouldn't say classes, meetings about the Catholic religion, and then me getting baptized like almost instantly. So yeah, it was very different than like what I had always been like aware of what had happened before you get baptized.
So knowing that, do you feel like religion plays a role in your sense of community? If not, why do you think that's not the case? Or if so, why?
I think I do believe religion plays part in like forming and shaping and like building community. I don't know if for me personally I would say that, just because like growing up, even when I did like for 18 years I grew up not really religious. Even when I was baptized at 13, all I got were those like 2-hour meetings, and like sincerely that wasn't enough to like teach me everything there is to know. But my Peruvian side of the family is religious, and like all of my tias and tios, they are religious, and like we talk about it at the dinner table when we're eating. And so in that sense, like my community is my family, and like that's how I would like build connections with them and talking about it. And then I would also get to learn about it myself, which I think is also important. But I wouldn't say it has helped me build communities, because I still don't identify as religious. I don't identify as like a strong or like a Catholic. So yeah.
Okay, now tell us a little bit about your political background. Do you identify with any particular party? Why or why not?
So I have always identified as Democrat whenever I've been voting, whenever I'm becoming aware of certain like elections or people that are being elected into certain offices. So I've always 100% leaned towards being a Democrat, and all of my family members are as well. And growing up, that's just how it was. Like we always knew that conservatism was bad, and like being conservative was like, you wanted to question that with your knowledge of being like on like being a Democrat. And so growing up, I was aware that both my parents were Democrats and how they voted, and we would talk about it. And then as I got older, when I turned 18, I was able to vote. I was also a Democrat voting in the first election that I could.
So in terms of your religious views, has those changed since coming to Willamette at all, do you think?
Oh, I would also say my religious views have changed also, just because growing up I didn't grow up with a religious background, I didn't grow up with a religious foundation, but coming to Willamette, I'm learning like the pros and cons of religion and like what that people can use religion to back like harmful and like troubling policies and anything of that sort. That I'm learning that religion isn't just like you go to church and you pray and you believe in something. Religion is also like used as a weapon to demonize and fuel hatred. And I didn't know that. I thought it was just go to church and you take these classes and that's what religion is. That's what being a Catholic is, and that's how I perceived it growing up. Coming to Willamette, I'm more aware and I'm trying to understand really all the nuances of religion and how they like impact like everyday life and how people use religion to either to mold their agenda or to really take a step back and try and analyze what their religion is doing and how it's harming certain communities and how impacting it can be. So I would say my religious affiliation has, or what was the question? Religious views have changed. So I would say my religious views have changed because growing up I thought one thing, coming to Willamette, and that one thing was that religion is this like grand, like beautiful thing. You go to church and it's community, it's family. Coming to Willamette, I'm realizing it can be that, but also some people use it in very harmful ways, and I wasn't aware of that. So, yeah, knowing that my understanding of religion has become a little jaded, also of like wanting to believe it there is some good, and like I remember being baptized and I remember being a happy time and like it was great and I was so happy, and I don't know if that was because I was with my family or if it was because of the religion I was being baptized into. And so coming to Willamette, I'm learning like all these things that religion can do and how harmful it can be, and that's been very like interesting to learn. So yeah.